In Russia, the mere mention of the name Anatoly Moskvin still elicits responses of horror and disgust amongst its citizens. Terms such as monster, grave robber, and psycho easily pass from their lips. But who is Anatoly Moskvin, really?
Like all offenders, he was not born a criminal. Anatoly Moskvin was born in Soviet Russia in 1966 to parents Yuri Fedorovich and Elvira Alexandrovna. They had known from an early age that he was intelligent, although his upbringing was far from easy. While he was in the 3rd grade, he returned home one day, covered in bruises he had received while being raped by an unknown man. It is unclear whether or not he told this to his parents as a child. They seemed to sense that something was not right with their son, though. Whenever they did try to question him about his odd behavior, he reacted aggressively. So instead, they left him to his own devices. It has also been reported that his behavior has been blamed on his parents for taking him for walks in graveyards as a child. Academically successful, he was always at the top of his class, but he was often bullied and ostracized at school and struggled to create social relationships. Instead, he squirreled himself away and spent every penny he came across on books, while independently teaching himself multiple languages. If this upbringing had so far managed not to scar young Moskvin, it was an incident that occurred on March 4th, 1979, that would do the job comprehensively. In later life, he referred to it as a turning point for him, igniting an interest in both the occult and the cemeteries he would later meticulously study, almost on a level of pilgrimage. Moskvin divulged how, at the age of 12, a group of men in black suits stopped him on the way home from school. They were on their way to the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova. Natasha had grabbed for a towel as she stepped out of the bathtub and instead made contact with a loose electrical cable, electrifying herself and dying instantly. The men dragged young Anatoly along to the funeral and encouraged him to kiss the corpse. He refused to kiss the girl. However, the parents would not hear of it. He began to cry, sensing the futility of the situation. He had begged to be let go, but was not permitted to. So, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, he approached the body in the coffin. Anatoly Moskvin later said, "A woman, apparently the mother of the deceased, gave me a large Hungarian apple and kissed my forehead. She led me to the coffin and promised me a great deal of candy, oranges, and money. She told me to kiss the deceased. I burst into tears and begged her to let go, but the sectarians insisted, everyone again saying prayers in a language I did not understand, and one of the adults drew my head to the waxy forehead of the girl in a lace cap. I had no choice but to kiss where I was ordered." Moskvin kissed the lifeless girl 3 times on the forehead. He wrote, "I kissed her once, then again, then again." The girl's grieving mother then put a wedding ring on Anatoly's finger and a wedding ring on her dead daughter's finger. He was then awarded a basket of fruit for his troubles and let free into the street, though not before he was told not to tell anyone of what had taken place for at least 40 days. On the corner of the street, Moskvin threw the fruit into the snow and then went to spend the money he had been given on a book about animals. "My strange marriage with Natasha Petrova was useful," Moskvin said in an article. He said it led to a belief in magic, a fascination with the dead, and that he felt attracted to cemeteries like a magnet. Whether the story is even true is besides the point by now, as his disturbing thoughts would go unchecked for more than 30 years. It may be safe to say that these early traumatic experiences must have had some sort of negative impact on young Moskvin. How could they not? Had he received some form of therapy as a child, could his later horrifying actions have been avoided? Maybe. Maybe not. Inevitably, life would go on for Anatoly Moskvin. After graduating from Moscow State University, Moskvin became well known in academic circles. His main areas of academic interests were Celtic history and folklore, and of course, a deep interest in death and the occult. He kept a personal library of over 60,000 books and documents, as well as a large doll collection. He also spoke 13 languages, traveled extensively, and taught at the college level. Moskvin also occasionally worked as a journalist and regularly contributed to local newspapers and publications. Moskvin was a self-proclaimed expert on cemeteries and dubbed himself a necropolist. In 2005, a fellow academic and publisher commissioned Moskvin to summarize and list the dead in more than 700 cemeteries. Moskvin claimed that between 2005 and 2007, he had gone on foot to inspect 752 cemeteries across the region. So Moskvin roamed from cemetery to cemetery. "I don't think anyone in the city knows them better than I do," he said of his extensive knowledge of the region's dead. He took detailed notes on each one and delved into the histories of those buried there. The hands-on historian claimed to have walked up to 20 miles per day. During these travels, he drank from puddles, spent nights in haystacks and at abandoned farms, or slept in the cemeteries themselves, even going so far as to spend a night in a coffin being prepared for a funeral. On his extensive travels, Moskvin was sometimes questioned by police on the suspicion of vandalism and theft, but was never arrested or detained after stating his academic credentials and purpose. The work itself remains unpublished, but has been described as unique and priceless by Alexei Yezin, the editor of Necrologies, a weekly paper to which Moskvin was a regular contributor. Moskvin posted a documentary series of his travels and discoveries entitled Great Walks Around Cemeteries and What the Dead Said. These continue to be published in a weekly newspaper. Although Moskvin's professional life appeared successful to the outside world, his personal life was an entirely different story. Moskvin led a secluded life. He never married or dated, preferring to live with his parents. If that were not unconventional enough, he abstained from drinking alcohol and smoking, and is purportedly a virgin. However, in 2003, Moskvin met Yulia Grinova, a young woman whom he much admired. Yulia was spiritual, and the pair entered into a non-sexual relationship. The relationship satisfied Moskvin's need for socialization while allowing him to maintain his vows of celibacy, and Yulia was happy enough with the arrangement, having suggested it herself. Yulia wanted a child, however, and it didn't take much convincing for Moskvin to agree, as he had wanted a child of his own for many years already. Given the non-sexual nature of their relationship, Moskvin applied for adoption of a young girl in 2003. Their application was rejected, however, on the grounds that Moskvin's earnings were too low. By this point, his income was erratic, and he was living hand-to-mouth on the paychecks he received from journalistic work he published. His parents didn't hold the same enthusiasm for his plans to adopt, though, which led to tensions in the family. Moskvin threatened, "I told my mother that I would be engaged in black magic and get in touch with the spirits of the dead." Used to his eccentric behavior, she merely told him to do as he pleased. In the end, it all fell to nothing, as his relationship with Yulia eventually evaporated. Was the disappointment of not being able to adopt a child too much to bear? Was the breakup the final straw for Moskvin, mentally? Only one person truly knows the answers to those questions, and it is Anatoly Moskvin himself. Whether or not there was a correlation between those events and what came later may never be known. In 2009, locals began to discover the graves of their loved ones desecrated, sometimes completely dug up. Russian Interior Ministry spokesman General Valery Grybkin told CNN that initially, "Our leading theory was that it was done by some extremist organizations. We decided to beef up our police units and set up groups composed of our most experienced detectives who specialize in extremist crimes. But for nearly 2 years, the leads went nowhere. Graves continued to be desecrated, and no one knew why. Then, a break in the investigation came following a terrorist attack at an airport in Moscow in 2011. Shortly after, authorities heard reports of Muslim graves being desecrated in Nizhny Novgorod. Investigators were led to a cemetery where someone was painting over the pictures of dead Muslims, but not damaging anything else. That was where Moskvin was finally caught. After being apprehended at the Muslim graves, 8 police officers went to his apartment to gather evidence. What they found there shocked them all and shook the world. Inside, authorities found 29 life-sized, doll-like figures throughout the cluttered apartment. The figures seemed to resemble antique dolls, except these were not dolls. They were the mummified corpses of human girls. It emerged that the female children were between the ages of 3 to 12 and had been dug up from nearby local cemeteries. Shoes in Moskvin's apartment matched footprints found near desecrated graves, and police knew without a doubt that they had their grave robber. There were also photographs and plaques taken off the gravestones, doll-making manuals, and maps of local cemeteries strewn about the apartment. Police also discovered a collection of photographs and videos depicting open graves and disinterred bodies, though none of this evidence could be conclusively connected to any of the bodies found in the apartment. Police determined that the clothes worn by some of the mummified corpses were the clothes in which they were buried. Some wore knee-high boots. Others had makeup on over their faces, of which Moskvin had covered in fabric. He had also hidden their hands in fabric. Investigators found music boxes inside the rib cages of the dead girls so that they could produce sounds when Moskvin touched them. There were also personal belongings and clothing inside some of the mummies. One mummy had a piece of her own gravestone with her name scrawled on it inside of her body. Another one contained a hospital tag with the date and cause of the girl's death. A dried human heart was found inside a third body. According to the investigation, the bodies primarily came from cemeteries in the Nizhny Novgorod region, though some may have come from as far away as Moscow. Moskvin actively cooperated with investigators and claimed he made the dolls over the course of 10 years. His parents, who were away for large portions of the year, were unaware of his activities. Moskvin had held an interest in Russian dolls, so his parents just assumed it was an extension of that interest. Is it truly possible that his elderly parents knew nothing of his activities? Based on the small size of the cluttered apartment, it seems hard to fathom how they could not. Many would heavily debate this in the months and years to come. Elvira, Anatoly Moskvin's then 76-year-old mother, said, "We saw the dolls, but we did not suspect there were dead bodies inside. We thought it was his hobby to make such big dolls and did not see anything wrong with it." Following the arrest, his father was hospitalized, suffering a heart attack. His mother was also hospitalized for a period, blaming her poor health on the shock of their son's arrest. His parents have been said to live in utter isolation because their community still ostracizes them. Elvira suggested that she and her husband perhaps just kill themselves, but her husband refused. A friend of his parents spoke of their shock in a later interview. The dolls didn't turn up suddenly. Moskvin had built up the collection over 10 years. All of them were kept in his room, only one in his parents' room, which he named Masha. His parents had no idea. When friends visited, they often remarked on them as works of art, calling them puppets. They just never thought they might contain mummified humans. The only concern his mother had was that at times he would talk to them. "Are you a child?" she would say. "Why do you play with them?" One New Year's Eve, Moskvin introduced Masha to his aunt after sitting her at the family table. "This is Masha," he said. "Do not be afraid of her." Neighbors were shocked. They said that the renowned historian was a quiet man and that Moskvin's parents were such nice people. Sure, a rancid smell emanated from the apartment whenever the door was opened, but a neighbor chalked that up to the stink of something that rots in the basements of all local buildings. Moskvin was aware that he was committing a crime, but felt that the dead children were calling out to be rescued and believed that rescuing the children was more important than obeying the law. He said, "From the very beginning, I knew that I was committing a crime, but I was so sorry for the children that, unfortunately, cloning is prohibited in our country. It will be allowed sooner or later. I just wanted some material for future cloning, so that these children could live for a second time." He was, of course, also motivated by his own desire to have children, specifically, a daughter. Moskvin denied any sexual attraction to the dolls, and instead considered them to be his children. Police seemed to agree and said he was not motivated by twisted sexual desires, with one officer saying he loathed sex and thought it was disgusting. While in custody awaiting trial, Moskvin cooperated with police investigations, detailing the various cemeteries the bodies had been removed from. He also supplied the names of the girls he had exhumed. He knew all of their histories and the circumstances of all of their deaths. Moskvin told police he carefully selected which corpses to take, saying, "I lay on the grave and tried to get in touch with her. I listened to what she said. Often they asked me to take them out for a walk." Moskvin continued in his explanation by saying, "At first, I slept on the graves. Then I adjusted because it was not convenient to sleep there. Instead, I carried the bodies where it would be convenient for me to sleep on them. I began to dry them and bring them home. This was done very cleverly and slowly, one at a time, so nobody knew about it." He later explained, "My parents saw almost nothing of this, and I did not let anyone else into this world. As a rule, my parents left the house for summer, leaving in April and returning in October. At this time, we were engaged in this world. I guess I really explored all that I could explore in this area of black magic. To be honest, I had my favorite children. I planned to keep my beloved children home in any case. Those that I liked less, I planned to take them to the garage, and they lived there in the garage." He said he dug up graves of girls because he was lonely. This would seem strange and horrifying to most, but not to Anatoly Moskvin. Could the loneliness of his troubled life really have been the sole motivation behind his nightmarish crimes? Moskvin would go on to explain, "The fact is that I suffered very much from loneliness, especially during the summer period when my parents were not there and when they took the cat. I did not disfigure them, did not dismember them. I applied all of my work gently, affectionately, politely, and I even tried not to swear in front of these children." He spoke to and interacted with the corpses, sang songs to them, and even held birthday parties and celebrated holidays for their behalf. Moskvin admitted that he would stuff the decayed corpses with rags. He used a simple solution of salt and baking soda to preserve the girls. Moskvin felt that their physical remains were too decayed and ugly for them to feel comfortable or happy. Then he would wrap nylon tights around their faces or fashion doll faces onto them. He would also insert buttons or toy eyes into the girls' eye sockets so that they could watch cartoons with him. Moskvin went on to say, "I sat them down. They had holes drilled under their eyes. I showed cartoons to them. I played children's songs. I myself sang songs to them. Ordinary children's songs that I would sing when I have a live daughter. After that, we ate together, or rather I ate. I just offered them food, as it is in the Celtic or Yak tradition. I treated them as if they were alive. They were just temporarily dead." Moskvin allegedly told authorities to not bother reburying the girls too deeply, as he will simply unbury them when he is released. Many consider this to be the threat of a twisted and cruel man, while others seem to view the statement as the ramblings of a sick man obsessed with his own fantasy world. But what did Anatoly Moskvin actually do with the corpses once he had them in his possession? He dug up the first body on May 9th, 2003, following a disagreement with his parents over adoption, instead deciding on resurrecting the deceased with his black magic. He said, "The coffin was covered with crimson synthetic matter. With a chisel, I hollowed out a hole in the lid of the coffin at the head of the bed and through it. I pulled out what was left of the body. It was in very poor condition. The girl was dressed in a white blouse, black skirt, old tights, and shoes. The child had long hair. Then I decided for the first time to try to mummify it. I moved the body to a remote corner of the cemetery and buried it in an abandoned grave of some grandmother." Moskvin also went on to say, "To properly mummify the body, you need soda and salt in various proportions. I bought these substances in the store. I found old stockings in the garbage dump and made bags from them, pouring soda and salt into them and tied them to the remains. I changed these bags once a week. If people paid attention to me, I said that I was there to feed the birds. On July 25th, 2003, I wrapped the body in different clothes and carried it back to my home in my backpack. Within 2 days, I restored the body. I stuffed rags inside, then I sewed the body with threads and made a wax mask on her face, and then covered it with nail polish, which I found in the trash. After that, I put on her clothes, which I also found in the trash." Anatoly Moskvin seemed to take a great deal of care in preserving the corpses of the children. There was a clear and specific method for his process. Some would say this was proof of just how much he cared for the children and that he never intended to hurt anyone, including their families. But did the court and all of the victims' families feel the same? In court, Moskvin confessed to 44 counts of abusing graves and dead bodies. He said to the victims' parents, "You abandoned your girls. I brought them home and warmed them up." During the trial, families of the girls he had mummified shouted out to the judge to imprison him for life, while others shouted for the death penalty. Eventually, neither prosecution nor defense appealed the outcome. He was ordered to pay compensation of around $75,000 for moral damages to the families of each child, though interestingly enough, the father of one of Moskvin's dolls rejected any compensation. I would not take anything from Moskvin. After all, he treated my daughter better than I had during her life. He dressed her, put her to bed, read her fairy tales, and showed her cartoons. Moskvin was charged for the desecration of the graves and dead bodies, a charge which carried up to 5 years in prison. Originally, Moskvin was also accused of having defaced the graves of Muslims, considered a hate crime, but this charge was later dropped. But what of his mental status? Could a sane man really have been found guilty of these crimes? After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that Moskvin suffered from a form of paranoid schizophrenia. In a hearing on May 25, 2012, the District Court of Nizhny Novgorod deemed Moskvin unfit to stand trial, releasing him from all criminal liability. Moskvin was removed to a psychiatric clinic, with his stay to be reviewed regularly. In February of 2013, a hearing approved an extension of his psychiatric treatment. His treatment was again extended April 2014, and yet again in July 2015. In 2014, a spokesman stated, "After 3 years of monitoring him in a psychiatric clinic, it is absolutely clear that Moskvin is not mentally fit for trial. He will therefore be kept for psychiatric treatment at the clinic." In 2016, it was reported that Moskvin planned to marry a 25-year-old native of his hometown who attended his trial. As of 2019, every request for the extension of Moskvin's treatment has been approved. Last year, a judge said Moskvin was not mentally fit to stand trial and should remain in a psychiatric clinic. If he is ever to be released, Moskvin has expressed an interest in returning to work, translating written books in Moscow, and marrying his mystery bride. Will Anatoly Moskvin ever go free? The victim's families think otherwise. His own parents do not wish for him to be released, fearing he would simply repeat his crimes. Natalia Sharmova, the mother of Moskvin's first victim, believes Moskvin should stay locked up for the rest of his life. Local prosecutors agree with Sharmova's assessment, even though psychiatrists say Moskvin now, in his early 50s, is improving. I still find it hard to grasp the scale of his sickening work, but for 9 years, he was living with my mummified daughter in his bedroom, Sharmova continued. I had her for 10 years. He had her for 9. Natalia Sharmova's daughter Olga was among the 29 he secretly dug up and dressed as a doll and kept at home. Olga had been horrifically murdered at age 10, the first time she was allowed to walk alone from the family flat to her granny's apartment in the next block. I'm 10 already. I can go myself, she pleaded. Her mother relented, and she went out with her favorite green bag and blue umbrella, never to be seen alive again. Unseen, a drug addict waiting in the lobby of her block had forced her back up to the top floor and robbed her of her earrings, and because she tried to escape, cracked her over the head with a metal bar. Despite searches for her body, Olga's remains with the umbrella and bag were not found for 5 months, wedged behind pipes in the block's attic. Olga's mother said, "We buried her on 2 October 2002. I could never imagine that almost exactly 10 years later, on the 5 October 2012, I would open her grave with police and find her remains had vanished. Her coffin was empty, with a hole at the top from which he had pulled the remains. You can't begin to imagine it, that somebody would touch the grave of your child, the most holy place in this world for you." We had been visiting the grave of our child for 9 years, and we had no idea it was empty. Instead, she was in this beast's apartment. In May 2003, Natalia and her husband Igor started painting a small metal fence they had erected around the grave. The next day, they came back to finish and felt someone had been there. A wreath had been moved, and the torment began, lasting 9 years. The same month, they found a note signed with 2 letters, D.A., standing for Dobry Angel, or Kind Angel, how Moskvin thought of himself. We shivered with fear each time we went to the grave, not knowing what to expect, she said. These sick anonymous notes were addressed to my daughter, calling her little lady. He congratulated her on all the public holidays. He remembered about 1 September each year, the first day of school year in Russia, and the last school bell in May. He counted carefully which school grade she was about to enter, as if she was still alive. For example, happy last month of your 6th year at school. Imagine what it was like for us, her grieving parents, reading these notes about our murdered daughter. It was not at all like some sick joke, but a spear through our hearts. Sometimes, the desperate parents arrived at the grave to find soft toys, stolen from other plots. And on January 1st, he always put New Year's decorations on the grave. In one note, he threatened the parents. If you don't erect a great monument, which she deserves, we will dig her body out. The couple erected a headstone in June 2003, and he penned messages on it before taking an axe to it. Natalia reported it to the police, who were appalled but said there was little they could do. She stated, "They told us, if you find him, do what you want to this barbarian. We won't object. At this point, we knew nothing about Moskvin, or that by now he had already removed her. But if I'd met him at Olga's grave, I'd have killed him with my own hands. In 2011, when police arrested Moskvin, they notified Natalia that they needed to open her daughter's coffin. Police explained that 29 mummified corpses of girls from different graveyards had been found at the flat he shared with his parents. When we opened the grave with policemen in October 2012, we found a coffin there which looked amazingly well preserved after 10 years, but it had a hole at the top. Moskvin had dug down, cut the hole, and pulled Olga's body out. I almost collapsed. I felt sick. My girl had been murdered. If anyone deserved to rest in peace, she did. But instead, her grave had been robbed. The police said Moskvin's copious notes showed the grave had been disturbed on May 2003, the first time Natalia sensed it had been disturbed. They told me not to see her. The sight was too grotesque, they said, but I have seen the pictures of some of the other girls. From her kitchen window, she can see the yellow-colored psychiatric hospital where Moskvin is incarcerated. I worry one day he will convince them he's sane, and he'll come out and start his morbid activities again, she said. To me, he got off lightly. Like other parents tormented by him, we reckon he knew what he was doing. I wanted to see him go to jail and face hardened criminals in the same cell. He should know real pain, not be pampered by doctors who see him as a fascinating psychiatric case. The majority of the victims' parents seemed to share Natalia's view of Moskvin. But how did they feel about his parents? Did they pity or condemn the elderly couple? Natalia later stated, "In the court building in February 2013, I was standing there when suddenly 2 policemen escorted him in. He walked right towards me. I lost my breath. I just stood there, mouth open like a fish. I looked at his whimpering, trembling mother." Natalia continued by saying, "Yes, I feel some sympathy. She has a mom after all. But deep in my heart, I can't believe she and his dad Yuri knew nothing. Just look at the police pictures of their home, like a burrow, in such a mess. I can't believe there was no smell or nothing suspicious to her about all these dolls. Yet, she turned a blind eye to her son's weird hobby." Natalia keeps a picture of her daughter in the kitchen and talks to her when she cooks. She would now be 22. She should be living her life to the full now, if not for the evil she faced. But to me, she will always be a child. As of 2019, every request for the extension of Moskvin's treatment has been approved. It's unlikely that Anatoly Moskvin will ever be set free to roam the streets of Russia ever again.
So, based on what we now know, is he good, evil, or just insane? Perhaps he is all of the above, and the better question is, how much of each is he?